Hello, thank you for joining us. My name is Marc Weingarten. I'm a partner in the Locks Law Firm here in Philadelphia. And with me today is John Gehlhausen, who is a lawyer who is located in Colorado. And John's firm and our firm have worked together for many years now in representing individuals who have been diagnosed with a condition known as CRPS, which is complex regional pain syndrome. It's also sometimes been called RSD, which the letters stand for reflex sympathetic dystrophy. And John and I today are going to have a discussion. A number of questions have been posed to us. We've actually written some of them down, so we'll remember to address everything that the people wanted us to talk about. And we're going to have a discussion today about what CRPS is, and we'll refer to it during the course of our discussion as CRPS and not RSD. CRPS is the more modern name for this medical condition. But we're going to talk about the medical aspects of it and the legal aspects of it and what it means to an individual who has been diagnosed with this condition, and try to answer the questions that have been sent in to us and that you wanted to hear about. So hello, John. Thank you for being here.
Hello.
John, why don't we start off with the very basic fundamental question, and that is, what is CRPS?
It's a very basic question, and I have seen doctor after doctor stumble over that very question. And essentially what it is probably the most painful medical condition you can get, that if it doesn't go away within the first year, tends to last a lifetime. It is right at the top of the McGill University Medical School pain scale. So a short definition, very short, is it is extreme pain that this person is going to have in various parts of their body. And it has various signs and symptoms, but that's what it is.
And we'll talk about all those things in some detail as we progress, John. You talked about the McGill Pain Scale. Can you just tell us what that is for those of us who are not familiar with it?
Yes, McGill Medical School a number of years ago came out with a pain scale as to various well-known medical conditions like cancer, terminal cancer, first-time childbirth, and they rated all those with regard to the overall intensity and length of the pain, and right at the top was complex regional pain syndrome.
Wow. Have people with complex regional pain syndrome known to in the past have amputations or commit suicide to get away from the pain?
Oh my, yes. The literature is full of references to people begging their doctors to have amputations, and also it is full of notations of people who have committed suicide because living with pain is just too much and too difficult, and in general there is no recognized cure. So yes, that is one of the things that this condition can lead to. Doesn't happen often, thank goodness.
What causes CRPS, John?
Well, in general, it is caused by trauma, and there's all different kinds of trauma. It can be pressure, it can be needle sticks. The sky's the limit. You can get CRPS as a result of automobile accidents, for example, just by having trauma. You can get it from ankle injuries, for example, a sprained ankle or something of that sort.
It's a wide range of possible causes.
Very. It's just like any other physical condition that can be caused by trauma.
John, what is there what I'll call a gold standard? Is there a test that a doctor can do to see if a person has this condition?
No, there isn't. There is no gold standard test. It is what they call a clinical diagnosis, and by that I mean the doctor has to hear about certain symptoms that the patient has, and then the doctor has to see certain signs. And that is what a clinical diagnosis is, and it's not easy to arrive at, I might add. But that's it. There are certain tests that have been put forth through the years, and 3 of them come to mind.
What are they?
Well, one is a thermogram, another is a Q-sart, that's sort of a sweat test, and the other is a triple phase bone scan, which is a type of x-ray. And at least under the current state of medical knowledge, as we're talking about now, these are not diagnostic necessarily. And if they come back negative, which frequently they do, it does not mean the person does not have CRPS. They still can have CRPS and generally do because of all the signs and symptoms. But if those tests, or any one of them, are positive, it helps to further confirm the diagnosis.
But is that why it's a clinical diagnosis? Because even if the tests are negative, they can still have CRPS?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's not part of the recognized diagnostic criteria that are commonly used now.
Well, back to those diagnostic criteria, John. You mentioned signs and you mentioned symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
First, can you explain to us what is the difference between a sign and a symptom?
Sure. A symptom is what the patient relates. In other words, this pain, it is throbbing, or they have some description of it, and then they describe the other odd things that are happening to them, particularly if it's a limb, like an arm or a leg, that are going on in that arm and leg, that the doctor may not be present to see. And signs are what the doctor can see at any particular time when in those few times the patient comes in and the doctor spends some minutes with the patient.
So if I understand it, then a symptom is what the patient reports, and a sign is what the doctor sees?
You got it.
Good, good. Can you tell us what some of the signs and symptoms are of CRPS?
Yes. There's quite a few. Swelling, coldness in a particular part of the body that has been affected by the trauma, color changes, hair changes, fingernail or toenail changes, limitation of motion, for example. Those are the frequent ones that come to mind. Hypersensitivity is another, where people, for example, often can't tolerate water on the particular part of the body affected. And by water, I mean falling water, like from a shower or from rain, or some are even hypersensitive to wind blowing on the particular limb, such as when you would get outside or even in a car with air conditioning blowing.
Well, John, you've told us that CRPS can be caused by almost any type of trauma, and you've told us what these signs and symptoms are that one would see if a person has CRPS. How long after the trauma would you expect to see these signs and symptoms develop?
Well, that's an interesting question, and it's one of the problems that makes this a difficult condition to diagnose. CRPS takes time to declare itself, as one doctor explained, I thought very adequately. It doesn't just appear automatically when you have some trauma. It certainly does not. And the general literature, and there's been at least one literature search on this, indicates that in most cases the signs and symptoms start appearing within 6 months of the trauma. Sometimes it's longer, generally it's shorter, but that was the cutoff point that researcher found from looking at probably hundreds of medical articles on the subject.
Does it matter in terms of the ultimate ability of the patient to recover or get better, whether it's diagnosed earlier on or later on?
Good question. My answer is no. However, A lot of times when you get into the literature, there will be statements that doctors have written. The sooner we can begin treatment, the better the outcome. I have never found any study that backs that up, and I don't believe that's true, other than the fact it's a general principle of medicine that doctors use when they treat conditions we go into doctors for. They always feel the sooner they get on it, the better the outcome will be. But again, with regard to CRPS, there is no study that backs that up.
John, you know, I'm throwing a lot of these questions at you, and of course, you're a lawyer, as am I, and you're not a doctor, but you seem to know a lot about the medicine involving the CRPS condition. How long have you been handling these kinds of cases?
My first CRPS case was in 1984. And a woman came in to me who had an injection that had been given in her upper arm in the deltoid. And from that point on, she was having horrid pain, and at that point in time, it was finally diagnosed by some physician as what they called then reflex sympathetic dystrophy. And I never heard of it, of course, and got into the literature with regard to it, and was absolutely fascinated. And we tried that lawsuit and won, and then other attorneys started referring these cases to me, and I've kept up in the literature ever since.
Right. John, I want to go back to this issue about the initial trauma that causes the condition, because this is very, very fascinating and intriguing to me, and perhaps to many of the people who are watching as well. But suppose that one has a broken ankle or a broken leg and then develops CRPS as a result, but the broken ankle or broken leg then gets better because fractures will heal. If the fracture heals, would the CRPS heal also?
It could, but generally it does not. In other words, one of the characteristics of CRPS is that the initial injury gets better. For example, a nerve injury. Nerve injuries often, or nerves grow back. But nonetheless, once CRPS starts declaring itself and with the signs and symptoms, they still can go on and normally do for much longer than the initial injury is still there.
Well, John, speaking of the signs and symptoms in relation to the initial injury, you mentioned a fairly good list of signs and symptoms. Does a person have the signs and symptoms always at the same time? Will they have them all at the same time? Will they come and go? What's the story on that?
No, and that's one of the things that makes this difficult to diagnose. For example, a patient has swelling or redness in a particular limb or coldness, and they go into the doctor, and on that day, none of those are showing. And that is just typical of this condition. The signs and symptoms are often, with the exception of the pain, I might add, that the signs and symptoms are what we call transitory. In other words, they can change even in the same day. Where a patient has swelling, for example, in an arm or a hand, and in the morning, and it's gone. Same thing with coldness, same thing with color changes. That's one of the reasons why this condition normally is not diagnosed at the beginning, even though the patient is having pain all out of proportion to what one would expect with the particular type of injury. And that, I didn't mention it before, is the primary symptom. Pain all out of proportion to what one would normally expect from that type of injury that continues on.
Is there a technical word for that, John? Is that called, is that allodynia?
No, it isn't necessarily allodynia. I characterize, no, it is pain. It is real pain these people feel. And it can be sharp pain, it can be constant pain. I've heard it characterized as, imagine your worst toothache, and then you have that in your arm. Right. Or a leg that has been affected. And then in addition to that, these people often get burning type pain or sharp pains that come and go. So it's one of the characteristics that sometimes occur with regard to the disease, but the pain is always there in different levels, and these people tend to have better days and worse days, and it's very hard for them to predict when it's going to be better or worse.
Well, I think, John, from some of your other answers, I know the answer to this question, but I want to find out for sure. Is there a cure for CRPS?
The short answer is no. That's it. What we know from statistics is that, and the one ray of hope I can give here, if people who get this condition, most get over it within a year. In fact, the latest statistics I've seen is 74% get over it within a year. But if that doesn't happen, then odds are it's going to be a permanent lifetime condition. And there is no recognized treatment that is a cure. Sometimes these people get better spontaneously, and there are numerous medical treatments that have been used by the medical profession to try to get these people better.
John, I want to stop you there because I do want to learn about those treatments, but before we get into that, you did say that 74% of the people might get spontaneously better or get better in a year.
Right.
But in that 74%, are they at risk to later on, after that year, come back and have it come back again?
That's well recognized, that once you get this condition, if it resolves, it can come back even years later. And when it comes back, these people recognize it because the pain is so different from any other condition they've ever had.
This is a very strange and odd type of a medical disease and illness.
Indeed it is.
Well, now, John, I think we need to really discuss what kinds of treatments there are available for people who have contracted CRPS.
Well, first of all, the medical profession at this point, let me just say this, has been trying since the Civil War to find a cure, and it has failed. There have been numerous medical treatments that doctors have tried that in some cases the patients have gotten better, but it's impossible to prove that it was because of that particular medical treatment. It could have been just spontaneously this was going to happen. So there is no study that says if you do this, that, or the other, the patient odds are going to get cured, much less get better. But nonetheless, modern medicine has used a number of treatments, and I'll talk about them, to try to at least help relieve some of the pain, which is, if you can't cure it, that's what people want. And primary among them is the use of drugs, and drugs in different combinations. And the problem with drugs is, of course, with drugs there always seems to be some side effect, as well as bodies build up tolerance. And so what you have is doctors prescribing this regimen of drugs, and generally it's a combination, and it will help relieve the pain for some period of time, and then the body builds up resistance. And a lot of these drugs people just can't tolerate, and that's an experiment that goes on. Another one is something called stellate ganglion blocks, or stellate are nerve blocks.
Right.
It can be either for the arm or lumbar blocks for the legs, and where essentially they go in with needles and they inject some kind of drug in certain areas of the body. And for some people, sometimes that provides some relief. These nerve blocks used to be very, very popular in the medical profession, and in recent years there's been a lot of doubt cast about them, and they do have some risks of severe consequences. So some people choose not to do them. But it's out there, and some people it helps for some times. And then there is the spinal cord stimulator, where in an operation nerve or wires are placed in the body to cause an electrical signal to go into the arm or leg or wherever, and that can, I'll use the term, confuses the pain signal. Right. And helps some people with some relief. Probably right now, as we're talking, that probably is the most effective, but it doesn't work for everybody, and then these have to be replaced after a number of years.
I take it the battery wears out.
Yes, exactly. And sometimes people build up a resistance to them. Another recognized thing that should be written about more in the literature is simply rest. Rest helps these people when they're having a flare-up of the pain. Doctors, well, they sometimes tell them to rest. People do that naturally. Sure. And when they, for example, go home and lie down, they tend to, after a period of time, well, sometimes it really helps relieve the pain that they have somewhat. It's well recognized to do that.
John, I've read some of the medical articles that talk about a ketamine coma.
Yeah.
What is that? Is that something that's acknowledged as being helpful?
It is in some people. Ketamine is a drug, and what it does is help relieve the pain, just like any other drug, for some people for some period of time. At one point in time, it was thought to be almost a cure. When you review the literature at this particular point in time, that is not the case. But it is another drug that does help some folks when it's tried. There are some nasty side effects to ketamine, and particularly they can affect a person's mind. And their memory and or ability to simply resolve problems, and that's one of the downsides that can occur with ketamine.
John, you mentioned early on in discussing that this condition of CRPS has been known since the Civil War, and as a historical note, we're in Philadelphia, and there is a doctor, a Civil War surgeon named S. Weir Mitchell, who was in Philadelphia, who lived and worked in Philadelphia. We have an elementary school in Southwest Philadelphia, 56 and Kingsessing, called S. Weir Mitchell Elementary. And right here on Walnut Street, between 15th and 16th, is a plaque on a building, and that's where his office was. Wow. So we were right in the middle of where S. Weir Mitchell lived and worked. John, when CRPS is first diagnosed, I take it it's diagnosed in one particular part of the body, whether it's an arm, a leg, a hand, or whatever?
Yes. Normally what happens is the trauma normally appears to a limb. It doesn't necessarily have to be a limb. For example, it can be the shoulder, to give you an example. But yes, normally it is a a limb where the symptoms first start appearing.
And you say first start appearing, is it confined to that limb or can it spread?
Well, that's another ugly aspect of this condition. It is well recognized to spread. For example, if it starts, for example, in the wrist, a common thing that occurs is it first spreads up the arm, and it doesn't follow the pattern of a particular nerve. It is all encompassing, where it affects generally the entire portion of the limb, and it can move up the limb, up the arm, and these symptoms start appearing in that area. It's called a stocking glove distribution. In other words, it's like you had a glove on and it affects the entire area, or you had a stocking on, and so it's all encompassing as opposed to up one particular nerve distribution.
Right. And then, John, for lack of a better word, can it jump from, say, you've been pointing to your right arm, can it jump from your right arm to your left leg?
Oh my goodness, can it ever? And that's well recognized in the literature. And modern medicine still does not know how that occurs. It's well recognized that it does. It can go to the opposite limb, it can go to legs, for example, one or both, and these people start feeling those pain symptoms and other odd things like swelling, hypersensitivity, color changes in these other limbs, and that's one of the nasty aspects of this condition.
Is the pain from CRPS a constant, or does it wax and wane, or get better and worse over the course of time?
Well, first of all, generally you have a constant aspect of the pain. Then, in addition, there are waxing and waning periods, and what that means, sometimes the pain is better on some days, sometimes it is worse. And that is extremely hard to predict. We don't know, modern medicine doesn't know why sometimes on some days it's going to be worse, and it's very difficult for these people to figure that out. Now they know, for example, certain activities, if they do them with the particular limb, is going to aggravate it. But other things can occur, Mark, like stress, weather changes, things of that sort can aggravate the condition and cause it to worsen on a particular day, which makes it very difficult for these people to plan.
Does the condition interfere with other bodily systems as well?
Oh, it does, and that is another one of the gifts that this condition keeps on giving. For example, constipation. That is a problem that happens with these people. Generally, that's associated with all the drugs they have to take.
That's what I would think. Drugs have that kind of a side effect.
Right, and but I've had clients who have had urinary problems because of it. Either they can't control their urination, or they can't urinate for whatever reason. It is well recognized in the literature to affect various systems in the body. I mean, this is really an ugly, ugly condition that in its extreme forms can be just terribly debilitating.
Why don't we take our first break here?